This is the voiceover for Little Boy. She stood at the kitchen window looking out at the playground. Her long gray braids hung down her back, and she wore a simple, soft brown cotton house dress. She liked feeling comfortable, whether it was here in town or back home on the reservation. Without realizing that she was thinking out loud, she let out a sigh and said, "Just like Little Boy." And just at that moment, her grandson, who was running outside to play with his friends, heard the sadness in her voice. He loved his grandmother very much, so he stopped to see what was making her unhappy. "Grandma, what's wrong?" he asked. She pointed out the window to a little girl who was sitting off by herself, watching the other children. Then she looked at her grandson, shook her head sadly, and said it again. "Just like Little Boy." Her grandson looked up at her, having forgotten that he was going out to join his friends, asked her, "Who is this little boy?" She sat down at the kitchen table, pulled him up onto her lap, and said, "This is the story, as it was told to me. Long ago, when the earth was new and rich with life, there was a small village by a large lake. The people who lived there were hunters and fishermen. They led a hard but good life. In this village there was a young couple who had 2 strong sons and were now awaiting the birth of their 3rd child. They were good people, and they always followed the way. One day, the young wife, her name was Morning Spring, was out picking berries when she fell. She saw the shadow of a large bear standing over her. She prayed to the Great Mother to save her and her unborn child. When she looked up again, the bear spirit was gone. As Morning Spring went to get up, she felt great pain. She knew that her baby was coming. It was too soon. It was not yet time for the birth. But the baby came anyway. He was very small, and he did not cry. Although Morning Spring was in much pain, she picked up the baby and brought him home to show her husband, Tall Tree. Tall Tree's joy in his new son didn't last long when he saw how small he was and how he didn't make a sound. The young couple felt that the baby would soon be dead and were very sad. They prayed to the Great Spirit to help their son, and they were heard. Although Little Boy, as he was called, did live and thrive, he was never very big or ever spoke. In time, even his parents and brothers felt uneasy whenever they were around him. So Little Boy would go off by himself to pick plants and berries, and no one stopped him. As he grew older, Little Boy realized he was different. Although he could not speak with his mouth, he could hum, and all the little animals of the woods would come to listen while he was picking his plants and berries. He never hummed in the village, because whenever he came near anyone, they would look away and pretend to be very busy. No one was ever unkind to Little Boy, but no one was ever more than polite to him either. More and more he would go into the woods. More and more he would find himself surrounded by the small creatures of the forest. There he found peace and happiness, because no one there ever turned away from him. One day, when he was sitting and humming to himself in part of the forest he had never been to before, he heard a low, deep growl. Something nearby was in much pain. It was one of his little woodland friends. He knew he had to help. He picked up the plants he had collected and followed the sound to a small cave. It was dark inside, and the growling had grown louder. Little Boy was afraid. But he knew he could not leave anything in pain if he was able to help. Slowly, he climbed into the cave. At first he couldn't see anything, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw her. Somehow he knew it was a she-bear. She had an arrow in her hind paw, and she was in great pain. He knew that she was dangerous, but he could not leave her to suffer. So he started humming. As he hummed, he sent a prayer to the great bear spirit to help him and to help this child of his. After a while, he noticed that the she-bear had stopped growling and was just staring at him. As he looked into her eyes, he knew that he could and must help her. So Little Boy crushed some of the medicinal plants he had gathered and placed them on the wounded paw. He gave her all of his berries and some of the water he had left in his water skin. All the time he did this, he hummed his song of love and healing to the bear. Soon, the bear moved back far enough for him to remove the arrow. She let him clean and bind her paw. And then she slept. Every day after that, Little Boy went to the cave and cared for his friend, bringing her berries and water and tending to her wound. One day, he came to the cave and found her gone. Little Boy was very sad to lose his friend, but happy she had gone on to live her life. Many moons passed. The season of the snow came and went 3 times. Little Boy grew more distant from the tribe, and they from him. Still, no one was unkind to him, yet neither was anyone ever a friend. Morning Spring had another son who was normal, and the village rejoiced for her and Tall Tree. Now came the time for the great hunt, the time when the old warriors took the new young warriors out to prove themselves. Only the very young, the old women, the very old, and Little Boy stayed behind. Since Little Boy was really no bigger than a child, it was felt that he would not be able to hunt as well as the others and would only be in the way. After the warriors had left for the hunt, a group from another tribe came to attack the village, to take whatever they wanted and leave before help could return. The people of the village who had stayed behind readied themselves to fight off the raiders as best as they could. They knew much would be lost or destroyed. As the raiders were getting ready to attack the village, a low humming was heard throughout the valley. It was Little Boy, the warrior, who stood upon the hill between his village and the invaders. With him stood a great many creatures of the forest. And as his humming grew even louder still, a great she-bear came to stand beside him. She let out one loud roar, and every other woodland creature added their voices to that roar as well. The raiders knew that the Great Spirit was protecting this village, so they fled the way they had come. Little Boy turned to see the elders, the children, and Morning Spring looking up at him in wonder. He smiled down at them, gave a little wave, and walked off into the woods with his forest family beside him. He was never to be seen again. But it is said that on some nights during the hunting season moon, a humming can be heard amongst the trees. Some have said they have seen shadows of a little boy and a large bear out walking on moonlit nights. And that is the story as it was told to me, the grandmother said to her grandson. Her grandson, who had a very good heart, gave her a big hug and a wet kiss on the cheek, and then he ran outside to play. But instead of going straight out to his friends, he went up to the little girl and started talking to her. The grandmother watched from the kitchen window, her heart filling with pride. She watched as her grandson walked with his new friend over to meet the other children, and they all started playing together. Thinking out loud again, the grandmother said, "I think it's time to visit some of my other children and grandchildren. Yes, it is time.